There are tons of methods to do forecasting, and it's quite an interesting area because you're trying to reduce uncertainty, you're trying to deal with uncertainty while trying to predict sales, for example. But it becomes a lot more complicated when you have innovations, because that adds to the uncertainty. So what I think would be nice to start with is thinking about what kind of innovations are there and how they affect forecasting. For example, you could have small innovations. Think about the new 787, you know, their new airplane. They've got these windows that do not require shades anymore. If you don't have to pull down the shades anymore. The actual glass changes color, it becomes darker electronically. So at some point that innovation, which is a small innovation, it's hard to do, but it's a small innovation, that innovation is going to trickle down to the car industry. But think about how you compute, you estimate sales of cars that have regular windows and sales of cars that have that kind of window. It's not that difficult to estimate, so to change your model in order to do forecasting of a car with that kind of window. So it's an innovation, but it's not a big deal. Now think about cars without drivers. Google is experimenting with cars without drivers. In order to do that, they just put some software, put some hardware in the cars, but they also had to put some hardware in the road, namely sensors, so that the car interacts with the road, exchange information with the road, and the car knows exactly what it is, and then keeps on moving and so forth. But that's a lot harder, because can you think about estimating sales for a car that drives itself? And that only drives in roads that have sensors. So it's a lot harder because it depends on a lot of other things. Aside from that, if you do those things, you also face some problems. For example, at some point in one of these tests, the driverless car that Google had crashed in another car, which was not a driverless car, it was a regular car. And then the police came and was trying to say, okay, I have to, file damage report, etc. So who was the driver? And Google was, well, no one was the driver. So somebody's got to be the driver. So what happened is that they had somebody, Google just had to say, I was driving. So I'm not sure how much of that story, specifically the police part, is accurate or how much is not. So, but I think it illustrates what happens when innovation is so extreme that it not only changed the product, but it changed the market, changed the structure. That's what Google actually did with the internet, right? Before they came, the internet had one specific way of working, but after the search engine became such a big deal, a whole advertising industry was built and drives and strives, and it's growing a lot based on that. So there are multiple levels of innovations, multiple levels of changes in the way that products exist and the industry exists, and the more innovative those things are, the harder it is to make estimates. There are other things that make it even harder. Think of hybrid cars. Everybody knows about hybrid cars, but if you're trying to estimate sales of hybrids, you're not just looking at past sales, you're also trying to see how hard would it be for your audience, for your consumers to accept it. For example, try to estimate sales of hybrids in California and try to estimate sales of hybrids in Texas, where they have tons and tons and tons of companies that produce oil, and people are very conservative. So you have to take into account how consumers will react and how they will accept or not accept those new technologies or those innovations. That makes it really hard. Hybrids have been around for a while. So 5 years ago it would be really hard to work with this kind of innovation because there was no history. But now you can look at sales of hybrids of Toyota, of GM, Volt, I think. So there are a lot of hybrids around. The information about their sale might help you predict what's going to happen with your sales. The more radical the innovation is, the more different, I would say, the more distant from what what consumers know, what consumers are familiar with it, the harder it is to predict how they react to it, how they accept. And for example, the harder it will be for them to tell what is this product. Is this product a tablet PC? Is this product a netbook? Is this product? So the harder it is. If the game involves, I don't know, creating a car that flies, that will be really hard to predict how consumers will react to it. But if the innovation is, I don't know, a better ABS system or a less radical degree of innovation, then that becomes much easier. One of the things that make it very hard is when the innovation depends on governmental decisions or other structure that's not there. For example, think of the hybrid car. There are at least three different levels of recharging systems, and not all of them are such that you can, park your car and recharge at home. Sometimes you need recharging stations, like a gas station, but a recharging station. So if you're trying to estimate how many cars you'll sell in a specific location, you have to know how much infrastructure is going to be there. But the decision to have like a gas station, not gas station, but energy station set up is not a decision that the company can do by itself, but it depends on politics. It depends on Washington, it depends on Hague and so forth. So if you're trying to sell hybrid cars and you need this infrastructure, it's quite hard to develop models to cope with that. The government provides subsidies and put money into developing industry like wind, solar, and wind power, solar power, and those kinds of alternative energy industries. Again, hybrids, as I was saying. So how do you know how sales will behave when the government stop funding that? Either when the prices go up because it's not subsidized anymore, or when companies stop investing that because they don't have governmental support. What's the optimal point to stop funding that from a government perspective? So that's a tricky decision, not just for forecasting, but also for public policy making. How long should they fund this kind of initiatives? And how should they do it? There's a balance between exploitation and exploration within the R&D department. So at some periods you want to put as much money as you can in R&D, develop the new technology, and then once that technology is ready, is mature, you can take it to the market, and you can have a position in that market. You might want to focus on exploiting that technology and making money out of it for a period of time. But if you're myopic and you only make money out of that technology, another company can come with a new technology, a new R&D, and disrupt you, in the sense that drive you out of the market because they do it more efficiently. So there are phases in which you put more money into development and R&D, and there are phases in which you take the output of your R&D and commercialize it, or some say monetize it. So there's a balance. At some periods of time you have to do one, and at other periods of time you have to do the other. That is assuming that the market is quite stable, but sometimes if you think about Betamax and VHS, did you ever see things like that? It was like a long time ago. There was competing standards, right? So in that case, you have some stages in which the standards are competing in the market. You're not the first one. There's two standards and they're competing, like Blu-ray and the other standard. They're just literally fighting, like there's a fermentation going on. At some point, one of them, either because Hollywood studio said, I'm going to use this Blu-ray standard, or for another network externality reason, one of those standards becomes a little bit more dominant, and then you enter a phase of relatively stability, where that standard is the standard, and then you profit from it, and at some point a new fight is going to start, and then you have standard competition. So it's like oscillating between stability and recreation. When should you kill an innovation, and when should you kill, for example, a car? GM is known for, and the old GM before the bankruptcy, was known for not being really crazy about killing cars. So they would launch brands, and they would end up with dozens of brands, or maybe even more. And at some point, some of those brands had to be discontinued when the government put money bail them out. So I'm not sure about right now, but in the past it's kind of hard to decide when you kill a brand, because it's not just profitability, but maybe you're trying to set up a product line, and that product will be key to support future cars. So there are a lot of things that make it really hard to kill a car, to kill a brand. Even though financially it might be very clear that now is the moment, there's a lot of things involved with killing a car and bringing a new car into its place. So all those things are things that make forecasting quite complicated, quite hard, and quite fascinating, which is why it's an area that is growing a lot, both in terms of research and also practice. It's a matter of sunk costs and how much have you invested in the infrastructure to build to exploit one technology. For example, if Intel want to build a new chip, microprocessor, usually has to put like $1 billion in a factory just to produce that chip. So those decisions are hard because they have a huge fixed cost. And once you put money into it, you want to change. It's not like this. You have to have a lot of certainty about the other alternative before you make a decision. So not only Polaroid, but also Zenith had the same problem, which was the last company that used to produce TVs in the US. Now they're none, because they had this cathode tube structure that they had to produce one type. The factories were structured to produce one type of product, and if they want to go flat screen, they would have to change the whole factory. So it's hard. It's hard for, I think, not only because of money that you put into a factory, which is the major thing, but sometimes even culture. The company has a culture to do one way, and if you want to change it, you have to. So yeah, it's a hard decision. That's why those guys are very well paid, because they have to make hard decisions that affect the company and literally can break the company. There are tools for that. That's where, again, forecasting tools come in. Try to see how much time you have until the next technology comes in, and try to see which of the alternatives is going to be the one more likely to succeed. One way of doing that would be have a spin-off. Maybe sometimes a low-risk way of approaching is to create a spin-off that is separate from the current structure, with a separate management, separate culture, separate technology. But that spin-off can go well or not, so it's always a complicated way of doing that. But a typical way of doing that is through spin-offs, but it's always hard. If you decide to do what some people call creative destruction, where you recreate yourself, I would say it's better that you do it rather than the competitor do it for you, right? It's better to you destroy yourself and recreate yourself than competitor destroy you, right? So.
I was stuck on a sorry sight. I was watching everything's divide. I was tripping on my own.